bureaucracy and against me. Now, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Well, it's because
I'm not going to do it.
It's because you've been harming people on Twitter and they're saving people from your harm.
Yeah, that's the rationale, exactly. Well, and it's also been difficult to formulate a defense because I'm not even sure, and this is, I think, part and parcel either of the ignorance of the college or their incompetence. I can't even tell what I'm being accused of. So, for example, one of the complaints submitted as evidence the entire transcript of my 3-hour discussion with Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And so, and I said all sorts of horrible things on that. Yeah, I know, everything this man ever said.
That entire podcast was harmful.
Yeah. So how do you defend yourself against that? I think they were objecting primarily to my comments about climate change models and the apocalyptic conclusions that have been derived from them, and complaining that I'm not a scientist, and bloody well I am a scientist, by the way. I have 100 scientific publications, and that's a lot, and I can read a scientific paper and understand it, unlike those who are accusing me, or the people who sit on the college, by the way. And so I'm perfectly capable of understanding a scientific paper, and I believe, and many scientists who are very solid scientists, like Richard Franzen of MIT, who has a pedigree that's absolutely impeccable, agree with everything I said. And so, now that doesn't mean it's right. That's not my claim. But my claim is that I'm not going off, with a half-loaded gun here, and I don't say things lightly. But anyways, it's not easy to figure out exactly what I'm being accused of. And so, so the upshot is essentially that I either submit myself to this media retraining program with their experts. Yeah, well, that's not happening. There's just not a chance that will ever happen. I can't imagine a circumstance under which I would be willing to do that. I can't imagine how I would possibly sit through such a thing.
That sounds
someone said I should just record it and put it on.
No way.
Online.
You wouldn't be able to stand yourself. You'd last 30 seconds in there.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'd like to put any educator through the horrible process of having to come and try to re-educate me either, because I can't see how that would go particularly well for them.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure who would end up re-educated in a situation like that. But I have my doubts that it would be me, because people have been trying to re-educate me for a long time, and it really hasn't worked that well. So, and that's generally because I don't say things that I haven't investigated right to the bottom. So, in any case, it's very stressful, this, and I've spent, hundreds of hours just trying to organize the arguments that have been marshaled against me and understand what the hell they are. Part of the process that's punitive, and the bloody activists know this, is that as soon as you have complaints levied against you, you're basically snowed under by the obligations of what's essentially a serious lawsuit. And, you might say, well, it's not a lawsuit, it's just an investigation. It's like, well, the college itself suggests that once one of these investigations is levied, that the person being investigated acquire legal counsel. So they know bloody well right that this is essentially a quasi-criminal investigation, or at least it has that element of process about it. And the social justice warriors who are utilizing these colleges have figured that out, and they're perfectly willing to use third-party bureaucracies as cudgels to enforce their so compassionate, narcissistic worldview and to be censorious. And you see this on Twitter too. As I've made this public, there are good thinkers everywhere who are saying, I got what I deserved, even though it isn't obvious exactly why I deserved it, and are perfectly happy to see this happening. And, that shows you what kind of motivations a large percentage of the population has. In Eastern Germany, a third of the population were KGB informers. And so there's a very large swath of the public who would be perfectly happy to see anybody who doesn't share their political views punished harshly for their audacity. And I think that's particularly true of radical leftists in relationship to anything that's centrist or conservative. And it's very interesting. Like I don't only say conservative things, although in the current political climate, I suppose I am more conservative. But every single complaint that's been levied against me is because I uttered a conservative perspective. And so, the probability that that's merely a consequence of chance is vanishingly small. It's 1/2 times 1/2, 12 times, and that's a pretty damn tiny number. So the idea that this isn't politically motivated is preposterous, conceptually and statistically.
I feel like we've had a lot of people reach out to, specifically from Canada, that are working professionals like doctors. I've spoken with a lot of them who've had generally former patients decide that they didn't like what they were saying on Twitter, specifically. So conservative doctors, and they're like, oh, I don't like what you're saying on Twitter, and then sending complaints to colleges to get their licenses. So I don't think this is just happening to you. I think we've talked to a lot of people in Canada that it's happening to, which means what profession does that mean you can't exactly trust to tell you the truth anymore?
Well, you certainly can't trust physicians or psychologists because they're mandated with regard to affirmative care now. So, for example, if you can't assume that if you take a child of yours who's gender dysphoric in for professional evaluation, that they're going to get any evaluation at all, because psychologists and physicians are mandated to do nothing but agree with the gender dysphoric individual. And so, and lawyers are in the same situation as well, is that they're not, if, for example, a while back, the governing body of the legal profession in Ontario mandated diversity, equity, and inclusivity requirements in relationship to hiring, even on small law firms in Ontario, with the clear implication that if you didn't buy the DEI social justice warrior political line, that your law firm was no longer in concordance with the dictates of the professional governing body. Now, Bruce Pardy, a law professor at Queen's, fought that back forthrightly with some success, but I've had discussions with all sorts of teachers and nurses and lawyers and physicians. All these people, Canadians need to know this, all these people are so terrified of, a good proportion of these people are so terrified of the regulatory bodies that there isn't a hope in hell that they're going to be able to tell you the truth when you're in the middle of a medical, educational, or legal crisis. And so, and Canadians are in a real bind because, for 175 years, it was okay in Canada to basically put trust in the public institutions, educational institutions and professional colleges, and even the political parties. You knew what they stood for, and generally they played the game straight. And that's flipped completely upside down in the last 7 years. And that's a terrible, bitter pill for Canadians to swallow. And most of them don't even know it's happened because their primary sources of news, like CBC, is completely corrupted by its $1.4 billion a year payoff from the federal government. CTV isn't much better. Most ordinary people have no idea where to get news. And so they're faced with this terrible conundrum, which is, well, either things have gone badly sideways, especially toward the left in Canada, or the people complaining, like me, let's say, or the truckers for that matter, are misogynist, racist, alt-right-wing, Confederate, Nazi bigots.